The noise hit him like a wave. That's the only way to describe it, this wall of sound from tens of thousands of people packed into Times Square, all of them screaming, cheering, losing their minds. It was November 4, 2025, and Zohran Mamdani stood there on that stage, gripping the podium so hard his knuckles went white. He was 34. A former rapper. A state assemblyman from Queens who nobody in the establishment took seriously until it was way too late. And now? Minutes away from becoming the youngest mayor New York City had seen in over a century. He wasn't smiling, though. Not yet. He was scanning the crowd, searching faces in that sea of celebration, and probably seeing his whole impossible journey flash before him. A journey that started under the brutal Ugandan sun and honestly could have ended a dozen different times before tonight. Nobody expected him to make it here. He was a refugee's kid, an artist who swapped his MIC for political manifestos, a radical the establishment wrote off as some trendy flash in the pan. His whole life had been this series of narrow escapes, from violence, from being forgotten, from everyone's rigid ideas about what a leader should look like or sound like. And as those confetti cannons got ready to blast and news helicopters buzzed overhead, there was this one massive question hanging there, how did this guy, this patchwork of continents and contradictions, manage to unite, and sometimes deeply divide, the most complicated city on earth? If you really want to know more about this finest young man, hit on that subscribe button right now. He leaned into the microphone. His voice cut through everything. They told us a New York for the many, not the few, was a fantasy. They said we were too young, too loud, too different. But New York City was built by the different. It was built by those who escaped. And tonight, we stop asking for a seat at the table. Tonight, we build a new one. Zohran's story doesn't really start with his birth. It starts with an expulsion. He was born in 1991 in Kampala, Uganda. His parents, Doksh and Anna Mamdani, were middle class, of Indian descent, their family roots going back 2 generations in Uganda. But they lived in the long shadow of Idi Amin's 1972 decree, the one that violently kicked tens of thousands of South Asians out of the country they called home. Even though the immediate threat had passed by the time Zohran came along, the atmosphere for Asian minorities was still this tinderbox. Economic resentment. Political instability. Always simmering. So Zohran grew up in this weird duality. Inside their home, there was all this vibrant, chaotic warmth, the smell of dokla steaming in the kitchen, old Bollywood songs drifting from a radio. But underneath it all was this fortress of quiet, unspoken anxiety. His dad, Doksh, ran a small auto parts shop. He'd built it from the ashes of his own father's confiscated business. Quiet guy, pragmatic, but his eyes always carried this weight. "We were always guests," he'd say later. "You built a life, you built a business, but you knew, deep in your bones, that the ground could shift at any moment. We were Ugandan, but to many, we were always the other." Zohran's mom, Anna, was the complete opposite of that quiet fear. Fiercely intelligent, passionate, a teacher who filled their small home with books and demanded perfection in her son's schoolwork. From her, Zohran got his love for language and this simmering sense of justice. From his dad, he learned what it actually feels like to have everything ripped away from you. That fragile balance shattered when Zohran was just 2. A fresh wave of violence and targeted intimidation against Asian-owned businesses swept through Kampala. One evening, Doksh came home, his face just ashen. He didn't need to say anything. The shop was gone. Burned to the ground by a mob angry about foreign economic dominance. Their life in Uganda? Over. With only what they could carry, the Mamdanis joined the quiet, desperate exodus. They became refugees for the second time in a generation. Stateless. Their identity ripped from them again. Zohran was too young to remember it consciously, but this trauma became the bedrock of everything he'd become. The original wound. The lesson that systems fail, that belonging is conditional, that safety is just an illusion if you don't have power. After a brief, disorienting stretch in a refugee camp, they got asylum and landed in Johannesburg, South Africa, right in that fragile, hopeful dawn of the post-apartheid era. Here, in a nation violently trying to stitch itself back together, young Zohran encountered a whole new dimension of injustice. He wasn't just the Indian kid anymore. By South Africa's complex racial taxonomy, he was colored, and he saw firsthand the brutal, entrenched inequality between wealthy white suburbs and sprawling black townships. He went to a diverse school where the tensions of a nation in transition played out every day in the hallways. Kids bullied him for his accent, for his name, for not fitting into any neat category. So Zohran retreated inward, found solace in a cheap notebook, filling pages with rhymes and observations. His first taste of using language as both shield and weapon. When he was 12, they got a lifeline. An aunt who'd made it to the United States sponsored them, and suddenly they were in Jackson Heights, Queens. New York City was a shock, this glorious, overwhelming symphony of noise and ambition and cultures crashing into each other. But for the first time, Zohran wasn't the odd one out. In Queens, everyone was from somewhere else. He got into Stuyvesant High School, where his intellect, sharpened by his mother's relentless expectations, finally had room to shine. But the class disparities were stark. He was a refugee kid on the free lunch program sitting next to Wall Street bankers' children. The injustice he'd felt in South Africa now had an American accent. It was during high school that Zohran Mamdani the artist was born. He devoured James Baldwin and Arundhati Roy. His notebook rhymes evolved into sharp, politically charged lyrics. He and some friends started a rap group, Queensbridge Logic. They performed in basements and community centers, their music this raw blend of personal stories and social commentary. Zohran took the stage name Z Origin. He was the wordsmith, his flow intellectual but visceral. Still that quiet, observant kid, but on stage? He found a voice that was anything but quiet. He went to Hunter College, studying political science by day, haunting open MIC nights in the evening. Torn between two paths, the safe, respectable route his parents dreamed of, academia, maybe law, and the unpredictable, passionate life of an artist that kept calling to him. For years, the artist was winning. Then 2015 happened. Zohran was in his mid-20s, scraping by. His rap career had a small following. He was doing freelance video editing, often for documentary filmmakers, something he'd picked up from his mom. He was politically aware but not really active star. Then he started listening to Bernie Sanders. The Vermont senator's message about a rigged economy, a political system owned by billionaires, the need for a revolution, didn't just resonate with Zohran. It felt like someone had translated his entire life story into policy. It was the framework for everything he'd felt but could only express through art, his family's displacement, the economic precarity, the glaring inequality in every city he'd lived in. The Sanders campaign was recruiting organizers. On a whim, driven by some sense of duty he couldn't quite explain, Zohran applied. He got the job. They put him in the South Bronx, organizing young voters. This wasn't a stage, it was gritty, unglamorous grassroots work. Knocking on doors, holding town halls in church basements, convincing disillusioned people their vote mattered. And Zohran was shockingly good at it. He didn't use political jargon. He spoke people's language. He listened to their struggles with rent, with jobs, with police, and connected them to his own family's story. He wasn't just performing protest anymore. He was organizing it. The pivotal moment came the night Sanders lost the New York primary. Zohran was with his team in this cramped campaign office, the air thick with disappointment. A young volunteer, nearly in tears, asked him, "So what do we do now?" "It's over." Zohran looked at these young, idealistic faces he'd helped mobilize and saw not an ending but a beginning. "Over?" His voice was low but firm. "This is where we start. They think this energy just disappears. Our job is to prove them wrong." That night, he went home and wrote his last song as Z Origin, a track called The Last Verse. The next morning, he walked into the local Democratic Socialists of America chapter and signed up. The artist had become the activist. The microphone was now a megaphone. Zohran's rise was both methodical and meteoric. He took those organizing skills from the Sanders campaign and applied them with surgical precision to Queen's politics. Started showing up everywhere: community board meetings, tenant association gatherings, local protests against gentrification. He was building a coalition. In 2017, he led a grassroots campaign that stopped a luxury development from displacing dozens of low-income families. Small victory, but symbolic. It proved people power could beat corporate money. In 2020, he set his sights on the state assembly. His opponent? A 20-year Democratic incumbent, a machine politician who'd grown complacent. The establishment laughed. A former rapper, a socialist trying to win a diverse working-class district. Fantasy. But Zohran and his team of young volunteers ran a campaign straight out of a new playbook. They didn't rely on TV ads, they had a viral TikTok presence. They didn't hold stuffy fundraisers, they organized concerts and community potlucks. His past as a musician wasn't a liability anymore. It was his superpower. He communicated in a way that was authentic, direct, powerful. He talked about his mother's fear in Uganda, his father's lost shop, the eviction notices taped to his neighbors' doors. He wasn't just asking for votes. He was building a movement. Election night, he won in a landslide. Zohran Mamdani, the former refugee, became the first Democratic Socialist elected to the state legislature from Queens. In Albany, he was a bomb thrower. Refused to play by the unwritten rules of deference and backroom deals. Used his position not to climb the ladder but to shake its foundations. He championed the good cause eviction bill, fought for taxing the ultra-rich to fund subway repairs, became this constant, nagging conscience for the Democratic establishment. Made powerful enemies. But his base adored him. They saw a politician who wasn't for sale. When the 2025 mayoral race began, he was still considered a long shot. But the city was in crisis. An affordability nightmare, crumbling infrastructure, this profound sense that the old guard had no answers. The front-runners were seasoned centrist politicians offering variations of the same failed solutions. Zohran entered the race late, announcing not in some TV studio but on the steps of the Queen's Public Library with supporters behind him. His platform was unabashedly radical: massive social housing build-out, a new deal for NYC to create green union jobs, free citywide internet and transit, all funded by steep taxes on Wall Street and billionaires. The press crucified him. The polls barely moved. But on the ground, something was happening. His grassroots machine, now a citywide force, was outpacing everyone. They registered hundreds of thousands of new young voters. Primary day? The political world was stunned. Zohran Mamdani had won. The impossible was now inevitable. At his core, Zohran has this philosophy forged in the fire of displacement. He doesn't see politics as some game of incrementalism or compromise. It's a moral struggle between the protected and the precarious. His worldview is fundamentally shaped by what he calls the refugee's perspective, understanding that the stability most people take for granted is, for millions, fragile and fleeting. My family lost everything not because of a natural disaster, but because of a political decision, he often says. That taught me that poverty, displacement, injustice, they're not acts of God. They're man-made. And what's man-made can be unmade. His ideology is this unique blend of lived experience and democratic socialism. He believes in radical redistribution of power and wealth, not as some abstract ideal but as practical necessity in a city being hollowed out by capital. He fights for housing as a human right because he knows the terror of having no home. He fights for a robust social safety net because one saved his family. His vision is of a city of care, a municipality that actively protects its most vulnerable instead of catering to its wealthiest. But there are complexities, contradictions. Critics point out his unwavering stances, like on defunding police, which he frames as reimagining public safety, often lack detailed practical transition plans. His supporters see moral clarity. His detractors see dangerous dogma. His belief in popular mobilization over backroom dealing has earned him a reputation as inflexible, a charge he partially accepts. "You can't compromise with a sinking ship," he once shot back. "You either start bailing water or you get a new boat." Away from the podium, the man known as Zohran Mamdani is a study in contrasts. The fiery orator who can electrify thousands is, in private, an introvert who needs long periods of solitude to recharge. He doesn't live in some mayoral mansion. He's still in the same modest rent-stabilized two-bedroom in Jackson Heights he's had for years, walls lined with overflowing bookshelves and art from local Queens artists. His most cherished ritual? Saturday morning walks to the local diner with his dad, Doksh, for coffee and what they call strategic grumbling. He's notoriously disciplined. Day starts at 5:30 a.m. with meditation, followed by an hour of reading, policy briefs mixed with poetry and history. Doesn't drink alcohol, a habit from his music days to stay sharp, and his vegan, ethical and environmental reasons. Friends describe him as fiercely loyal but intensely private. He's close to his tight-knit group from the Queensbridge Logic days. They're teachers, social workers now, and one's his head of security. They're his anchor to the world outside politics. He's unmarried, no kids, a fact opponents subtly weaponized to paint him as immature or unrelatable. Truth is, he's been in a long-term relationship with Ilara Vance, a public school teacher and union organizer he met during the 2020 campaign. They're rarely photographed together, a conscious choice to protect the one part of his life that's entirely his own. People who know him best say beneath that calm, analytical exterior is a dry, self-deprecating wit and this deep empathy that can be overwhelming in one-on-one conversations. He still writes poetry, though he shares it with no one. The artist's still there, observing, processing, feeling the weight of the city he now leads. No rise this swift and disruptive happens without generating powerful backlash. His critics, ranging from moderate Democrats to the city's business elite, don't see a visionary. They see a dangerous ideologue. Their most potent criticism? His lack of executive experience. He's never managed a lemonade stand, let alone a city of 8 million people with a $100 billion budget, one former mayor scoffed. That argument gained real traction during the campaign, with opponents warning his ambitious plans weren't just unaffordable but logistically fantastical. His foreign policy positions, rare for a municipal candidate, also became a lightning rod. During the 2021 Gaza conflict, as an assemblyman, he signed a statement using the phrase Israeli apartheid and calling for an end to all U.S. military aid. The backlash was immediate and fierce. He was accused of anti-Semitism, which he vehemently denied, pointing to his long-standing relationships with Jewish community leaders and his condemnation of all bigotry. Still, the episode cost him support among some older, more conservative Jewish voters and gave opponents constant ammunition to question his judgment. Maybe the most damaging controversy surrounds his past association with People's Horizon, a far-left activist group advocating for complete abolition of police and ICE. While Zohran never endorsed their full platform, he spoke at 2 of their rallies in 2018. Attack had endlessly looped those clips, painting him as an extremist who'd dismantle police and leave the city vulnerable. His more nuanced position, divesting from policing to fund social workers, mental health responders, community development, often got lost in the soundbite war. He's acknowledged his past rhetoric was sometimes imprecise, but he refuses to disavow the core impulse, demanding a fundamental rethinking of public safety. For supporters, that's principled steadfastness. For critics, it's a damning refusal to moderate his radical views. Today, Zohran sits at the epicenter of power, the mayor's office in City Hall. The confetti's long gone, replaced by stark reality. His desk is buried under briefing books, budget reports, endless urgent crises that define New York. He's the same guy who stood on that stage in Times Square, but the weight of office has already etched new lines on his face. The revolutionary is now the administrator. His first 6 months have been a whirlwind. He's notched some significant, symbolic victories. Pushed through an expansion of rent stabilization laws, a direct campaign promise kept. Launched the first pilot programs for Social Housing NYC, a city-owned model for permanently affordable apartments. And in a move that stunned everyone, he rallied the city council to pass a billionaire's surtax funding fare-free buses on 5 key routes. Tangible win for his working-class base. But the challenges are monumental. The police union is openly at war with him, staging slowdowns to protest his proposed budget reallocations. Wall Street firms are whispering about relocating to New Jersey or Florida, spooked by his rhetoric and taxes. The major newspapers' editorial boards, which largely opposed him, critique every misstep with this "we told you so" air. His approval ratings are a study in polarization, sky high among young people, progressives, communities of color, abysmally low among the wealthy, older voters, traditional power brokers. He's simultaneously the most beloved and most hated mayor in recent memory. The stakes couldn't be higher. He's trying to prove his radical vision isn't just campaign poetry but a practical blueprint for governing. The success or failure of his mayoralty will be a referendum not just on one man but on the entire progressive movement he's come to represent. What will Zohran Mamdani's ultimate legacy be? Too early to tell, but the contours are already visible. At minimum, he's irrevocably changed the landscape of New York politics. Proved a candidate can run without corporate PAC money, without the party machine's blessing, and win by mobilizing a new multiracial coalition of the young, working class, and disenfranchised. He's moved the Overton window, making ideas like social housing and taxing extreme wealth part of mainstream political conversation. Win or lose, no future politician in New York can ignore the energy he's tapped into. History will judge him on whether his ambitious programs worked. Will social housing NYC become a national model or a costly, mismanaged disaster? Will his green jobs plan revitalize the economy or drive business away? Will he make the city more affordable and equitable, or will his policies, as critics warn, inadvertently deepen a fiscal crisis? The unanswered questions are as vast as the city itself. His future and the movement he leads are now inextricably linked. Pundits already whisper about the governor's mansion, a Senate seat, maybe even a presidential run. But for Zohran, the immediate goal is more concrete: prove his theory of change can work on the ground, in the most complex urban laboratory in the world. He's the test case. If he succeeds, he could inspire a generation of Zohran Mamdanis to enter politics across the country. If he fails, the forces of the status quo will point to his mayoralty as proof that radical change is dangerous fantasy. The broader meaning of his story, refugee to mayor, is a powerful testament to America's promise. But the next chapter will determine whether that promise can translate into lasting, functional reality. So we return to where we began, that cold, triumphant night in Times Square. The image of Zohran Mamdani with his hands raised in victory is now layered with everything we know: the fear in Kampala, the dissonance of Johannesburg, finding a voice in Queens, the pivot from rhythm to revolution. His story is the story of our era, of global displacement, of rising inequality, of a generation's furious demand for a better world. He's a symbol, for better or worse. A symbol of hope for those who believe the system is broken. A symbol of fear for those who believe he'll break it further. His life poses one final, haunting question for all of us: in a time of crisis, do we place our faith in the safe, tested hands of the establishment, or do we gamble on the passionate, untested vision of the outsider? Zohran Mamdani took that gamble with his life. Now a city of 8 million is living with the consequences. As he said on that stage, his words echoing into the New York night, they're no longer asking for a seat at the table. They're building a new one. The construction is underway. And the whole world is watching.